This section is on the Banzaf power index. So this is going to be really useful when we want to determine the probability of changing the outcome of a vote when power is not equally divided within a weighted voting system. So for example, here to start out, we need 101 votes to pass the motion. That's our quota, and these are the players. We have we have player 1 with 99 votes, player 2 and player 3. Okay, and usually when we want to calculate this, we want a system that requires at least 2 players to pass a motion, because if it were just one player, then there'd be a dictatorship and it wouldn't really be a legitimate problem to work with. So anyway, so what you can see here is that if we were to add let's see, player 1 and player 2, their votes together, so 99 plus 98, that's 197, so that's enough to pass the motion. 99 and 3, that's 102, that's enough to pass, and 98 and 3, and that's just enough to pass. Next, a coalition is any set of players that join forces and vote the same way. Okay, so a group of voters who all vote yes or all vote no. In this example, we take player 1 and player 2 with weights 8 and 7. Okay, and so together that makes up 15, and they could win by voting together. They could get yes with just as many of them. And then to determine the number of coalitions just in general, that formula is just a simple 2. It should be 2 to the n power minus 1. So I'm going to rewrite that real quick. So that looks like 2 times n. Let's rewrite that. It should be 2 raised to the n, subtract 1. Okay, so for example, in this system there are 4 players, so it's going to be 2 to the 4th minus 1, which is 16 minus 1. So there's 15 possible ways we could list out coalitions of players that would vote the same way together. A grand coalition is a coalition consisting of all players, so when all players vote the same way. And note that some coalitions will have enough to win, and sometimes they don't. So conveniently, we're going to call the ones that win winning coalition, and the ones that lose a losing coalition. So 2 examples here. If player 1 and player 2 decide to vote the same way, 96 and 99 would make 195. They definitely have enough to win, so there'd be a winning coalition. If player 2 and player 3 were to vote, they get 99 total, 96 plus 3, so that's going to be called a losing coalition if those 2 were to vote yes, but player 1 were to not vote yes. Right, a critical player is a player who is required in a coalition to win. And this is a really important term in this chapter in general, especially for this section, because it's mainly the key feature of the Banzaf power index, which is based off how often someone is critical within coalitions. So we have the system again where we have 101 is the quota, 99, 98, and 3 are the weights of the players. And here with this chart is a list of the winning coalitions. Okay, we don't care about the losing ones, we're just focusing on the winning coalitions. And down here at the bottom, this should say capital W subtract little w should be less than the quota. And what that means is if we take the weight of a coalition and subtract the weight of a single player from that coalition, if it's less than the quota, then they are going to be a critical player. So for example, let's look at this first coalition, player 1 and player 2. So 99 plus 98 adds up to 197. If we were to take 197 and subtract 99, we would get 98, which is less than the quota. Okay? If we're to take 197 and subtract 98, we get 99, which is also less than the quota. of 101. So that's the reason, or that's why both of these players are critical, and it's listed over here. So if we were to drop either one of those, it would not be a winning coalition anymore. All right, and that's usually that's common with coalitions of just two people, because a coalition of just one person, well, a winning one, that'd just be a dictatorship. All right, next one we have player 1 and 3. So that's 99 plus 3, and that gives us the 102. Same story. 102 subtract 99, that's going to be less than 101. Same thing goes for 102 minus 3. So that's why these guys are both critical players. Same thing goes for the next one. Notice on the bottom, player 1, player 2, player 3. None of those are going to be critical, because if we take 200 and subtract, for example, 99, player 1's vote, that's going to be 101, and that's still enough. So player 2 and player 3 can win it alone. 200 subtract player 2's votes, that's going to be 102. That's enough, and 200 minus 3 is definitely going to leave us with a winning coalition. That's 197. So none of these numbers are less than the quota, so none of those players are going to be critical. You can also think of it within the winning coalition, who has veto power. If we were to drop that person's vote, the winning, or that coalition would no longer be a winning coalition. So the importance with finding a critical player is because of the way the Banzaf power index works. Banzaf says a player's power should be measured by how often the player is a critical player. And in this case, each player is a critical player 2 times out of 6. So even though player 3 had only 3 votes versus player 1's 99 votes, they're just as critical the same amount of times. And that's going to matter a whole lot in this section. And next, we're going to go through the steps of how to actually calculate the power index. So the first step, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read these off to you, and then we'll have 2 examples to follow, and I'll kind of label the steps in the examples as we do them. So the first step is to make a list of all the possible winning coalitions, okay, and just the winning ones. We're not concerned with the losing coalitions. Next, within each winning coalition, we need to determine the critical players. Okay, and to determine if a given player is critical or not in a given coalition, remember we subtract the player's weight from the total number of votes in the coalition. And if the difference drops below the quota, then that player is critical. So basically, someone who is needed in that coalition to make it a winning coalition. If that doesn't happen, then the player is not critical. And sometimes you're going to be able to just do this in your head, although sometimes you may need a calculator depending on how large the amount of votes are. All right, step 3, we're going to count the number of times that player 1 is critical total. We're going to call this number B1, and we're going to repeat this for every other player. So player 2, the number of times is going to be called B2, and for player 3, it would be B3, so on and so forth. Step 4, find the total number of times all players are critical, and this total is given by, we're going to call this T, and all those numbers we just found in step 3, we're going to add those together. And in the very end, we're going to find the ratio for each one, so the total number of times that a certain player is critical divided by the total number of times that all players are critical. Okay, and that's going to give us kind of like a percentage. And this is what gives the power in the Banzaf power index of player 1, and then you would repeat it for player 2, player 3, and so on and so forth. And in the end, when you're describing a power index for a certain player, we're going to refer to that as beta 1. Okay, so there's a difference between that and B1. And the complete list of the betas is called the Banzaf power distribution. Okay, so the power index is for one player, and the power distribution is for all. So for example, if we do a problem and we get player 1 has 40% of the power. Alright, that's the index for player 1. And then notice that that's included here, but everyone else's power index is included, and that is the entire distribution for the problem. Alright, here's our first example. We have a weighted voting system where the quota is 7. We have 4 players, so players 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and it is worth noting that if we were to do 2 to the n minus 1 to tell us the amount of coalitions possible, we would get 15. But we don't want to list all 15 of those coalitions out, we just want the winning players. So that brings us to step 1. Which is list out all the winning coalitions. So the first coalition is going to be player 1 and player 2, okay, because together they have 8 votes. Alright, next is player 1 and player 3 with 7 votes. Next is going to be, now notice we can't, we don't have any more couples here, so no more groups of 2, because we could do players 2 and 3, but that wouldn't be enough, or player 2 and 4, so we need to move on to groups of 3. So player 1, player 2, player 3, yeah, and that's going to make 10 total, so we know that's enough. Player 1, and these numbers I'm writing on the side, 8, 7, and 10, these aren't part of the problem. These are just to verify that that they're a winning coalition, to show you that the total is 7 or more. We have player 1, player 2, player 4, okay, and that's going to add up to 9. We also have player 1, player 3, and player 4, and that total should be 8. Okay, and at this point, there's no more triples that we could do work. We couldn't use player 2, 3, and 4 because that only adds up to 6. So the last coalition, winning coalition, is going to be the grand coalition of all players. Okay, and that total coalition is going to add up to 11, so we know that works. Alright, so that's the first step. Now the second step is to go through and we want all the critical players, okay? So who are the critical players within each winning coalition? Let's look at the first one, player 1 and player 2. Remember, if we take the weight of that coalition, so 8, and we subtract either one of those, so 8 minus player 1's weight, 5, that's 3. That is less than the quota 7, so we know player 1 is critical. If we take 8, subtract player 2's weight, which is 3, we get 5, which is also less than 7. So if either one of those were to drop from the coalition, it would not be a winning one, making both of them critical. You can almost think of it as in within the coalition who has veto power, okay? So not the entire problem, but just within each coalition, whoever has veto power also is a critical player. So for the next one, player 1 and player 3, if we were to do 7 minus player 1, which is 5, we get 2. That's that makes player 1 critical, and 7 minus player 3, 2 is 5. Okay, so these are both critical. The next one, player 1, player 2, and player 3. We know player 1 is going to be critical, and I'm going to stop writing the numbers out to the side. You can do that if you need to, but at some point you may get to where you can do it in your head, unless the numbers are a lot bigger, then you might need a calculator. So for this one, player 1 is definitely going to be critical, because if we take 10, subtract 5, we'll have 5, so we need player 1. Now if we take away player 2, player 1 and player 3 have enough to win it. The same goes with player 3 if we were to take that player out. So player 1 is the only critical player in that case. Next, we have player 2, player 4, and player 1, player 2, player 4. And if we take away, let's see, so 9 minus 5, yeah, 4, that's definitely less. So that one is critical. Alright, player 2, if we do 9 minus 3, that's 6. And that's just one shy of 7, so player 2 is actually going to be critical there. And then if we do 9 minus player 4's weight, which is 1, 8. Okay, so we still have enough, so we don't need player 4 there. I think the same thing's going to happen in the next row, where player 1 is a critical player because 3 and 4 can't win it alone. But if we take out player 3, player 1 and 4 would add up to 6, and that wouldn't be enough. So player 3 is going to be critical. But if we were to take out player 4, player 1 and 3 can win it with 8. So, and I think let me double check. Or with 7. Player 1 and player 3, 5 plus 2, that would add up to 7. And that would be enough. And in the last one, the only person who we really need in this coalition is going to be player 1 with those 5 votes. If we were to drop anyone else, it wouldn't really matter. Any group of 3 could win it, except for the group where it was just player 2, 3, and 4. That would not be enough. So player 1 is the only critical player there, and I'll show that here. 11 minus 5 equals 6, and that would drop us below. Alright, that's step 2. Now moving on to step 3. That's where we find the amount of times each player is critical, and we've already done the hard work, so now we just list that out. So, for example, B1, so when is player 1 critical? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 6 times. B2, when is player 2 critical? Well, that's 1, 2, just twice. So I'm looking at the amount of times that player 2 has been circled. B3, 1, 2, so twice again, and then B4, and that is 0 times. Okay, so player 4 is never critical in this case. Step 4, the total amount of times someone is critical. So that's just going to be 6 plus 2 plus 2. So that's going to make 10. And this is going to be nice and easy for us because when we divide by 10, doing the percentages will be easy to do in our head. Last step. So we're going to find the distribution by getting the power index for each player. So for player 1, we're going to refer to that as beta 1, so different than B1. We'll take the number of times they were critical, so 6, out of the total amount of times that we had critical players, so 6 out of 10, so just a simple 60%. Beta 2 is going to be 2 times out of 10, so 20%. Beta 3, same thing, 2 out of 10, so 20%. And beta 4, 0 times out of 10, so 0%. So there is our Banzaf power distribution with all 4 of the indexes for each player. So we can see that player 1 definitely has the most power in this system. Alright, so here's the last example in this section. And this one should be a little bit quicker because we only have 3 candidates. So I'm going to go through this one a little faster. If you think you got it, work through it, check it at the end. And if you're still don't really know what you're doing yet, just try to follow along again. So here we go. I'm going to list out the winning coalitions this time. And those, so step 1, are going to be player 1 and player 2, player 1 and player 3, okay, and with a total, so player 1 and player 2 add up to 5, player 1 and player 3 also add up to 5, player 2 and player 3 also add up to 4, so that's enough to pass. And then we have the winning coalition, or the grand coalition in the end, where they all vote together, making 7. Alright, so there's only 4 winning coalitions here. Second step, we're going to find the critical players, right? So, sorry, that says critical. Anyway, in the first coalition, player 1 and player 2, both of those are going to be critical because if we say 5 minus 3, that's going to be 2. That's less than the quota. If we say 5 minus 2, that's 3. That's also less than the quota, so they're both critical. Player 1 and player 3, those are also going to be both critical because if we drop either one of those, we're going to go below 4. Player 2 and player 3, both are going to be critical, and because if we drop either one of those, again, we're going to be below 4 votes. Notice in the Grand Coalition, no one is required. If we were to drop player 1, player 2, and 3 are enough to have it. If we were to drop player 2, player 1 and player 3 would have it, and so no one is critical there, and so we're done with that step. Step 3, so we're going to find B1, sorry, I should say, not beta 1, B1. That's the number of times player 1 is critical, and that is twice. Player 2 is critical twice, and player 3 is also critical only 2 times. So in this case, it's going to be very even, and you can already tell it's going to be 33% across the board. But let's go ahead and finish out the calculation. So step 4 would be our total amount of times that everyone's critical, so that's 2 plus 2 plus 2, and that is 6. And step 5, so now to find beta 1, that's going to be 2 out of 6, so player 1's power index is 33.3%. And we're going to get the same thing for the 2 others, so player 2, also 2 out of 6. And player 3. So this is a really cool example because even though player 1 has more votes than players 2 and 3, the power is still the same because of the number of times each player is critical.